Welcome to the KBB Review podcast, the show all about the ins and outs and ups and downs of being an independent kitchen and bathroom retailer. I'm still Andy Davis, the editor of KBB Review, and this week we're all about margins. Just how do you make sure that the difference between the price you buy and the price you sell is enough to make the living you want? What is a healthy margin? How do you track and measure it? Is it best as one overall number, or do you break it down by category? Where do margins slip? And when do you sacrifice margin to maintain cash flow? So the gang is all here. We have Nick Warrington from Stuart J. Warrington in Macclesfield. Hello, Nick.
Hello, Andy.
We have Liz Pantling-Jones, Liz PJ from Lima Kitchens in Milton Keynes. Hello, Liz.
Hi, Andy.
There's Steph Warner from P1 Bathrooms in Hove. Hello, Steph.
Hi, everyone.
And hopefully tuning in at some point, we have Trevor Scott from RFK in Rugby. If you've heard the last couple of episodes, you'll know that we're following Trevor's trip around Scotland in his tour bus, but he's currently trying to find a signal somewhere on top of a mountain. I don't know, something like that. So let's get to the business at hand and talk all about margins. It's one of those weird issues, so I'm going to see how much you're all prepared to actually say about your margins. So I'm going to start with you, Nick, because you look the most nervous.
Fidgety, yeah.
Obviously, a healthy margin is what everyone is aiming for, but what is a healthy margin?
That's a very good question. And I don't know the answer other than that everyone keeps telling me my margins are too low. I think within the industry, there seems to be this golden halo around the number 40. And I think that's what a lot of people would aim for. But I'm not at that. It would be interesting to have an anonymous straw poll within the KBB industry and people put a mark on a graph to see where their margins actually lie versus, where these aspirational margins are, because I think there's probably a disparity between the two. I know there is in my case.
Is a healthy margin variable dependent on your business, the part of the market you operate in, where you are in the country? I mean, there's lots of factors that go into it, isn't there?
For me, I run a fairly tight ship overheads-wise. We've got small premises. I don't pay a lot of rent, not got a huge amount of staff. So obviously that affects what I can or can't get away with in terms of my margin, than perhaps compared to a business that's got significantly higher overheads. And you also have to be conscious of what the local competition is doing. We'd all like to think we're ploughing our own furrow, but we're not. At the end of the day, we have to be alert to what the market allows us to charge.
Yeah, I'd agree. I'd say that margin across a full job definitely falls below that 40,000. Maybe there are elements that we can get away with being a bit higher on, elements which are vastly lower. But again, being component based, we choose what we want our product to look like, but we still need to remain competitive in the market. So there's a balance to be had there as well. And we are one of the more expensive retailers in the area. So we need to make sure that we're using the things that separate us, but also not pushing to an ideal margin.
Do you mean 40% or 40,000? Are you making 40,000 on every kitchen?
Yeah, that's what I'm doing.
That's a hell of a margin.
Yeah, it would be great. It would be great. But when you're dealing with jobs, we quoted on one that was 10,000 at the weekend, and then we've got another one that's 6 figures. It's really hard to kind of manage that, because even those lower value jobs have just as much work sometimes, because you've still got to source all of the different products. You've still got to do all the same checks. It just takes you a little bit longer sometimes on those bigger jobs.
So, Steph, is a healthy margin healthy for your business as opposed to having some kind of overall industry standard that you think you should be aiming for? Or is it useful to have a benchmark?
I think it is useful to have a benchmark. We always try and get above a certain margin. But ultimately, a good margin is one that's healthy for your business. So I think a good margin is where your percentage is high and the stress is low, or the admin is low, like you're alluding to. And a bad margin is not making much money with a bit of a complex job, which is going to eat into staff time and potentially come with issues later on down the line. But we will always aim for that certain percentage. I think it might be a bit different in bathrooms to kitchens. We're always sort of aiming for 40 to 50. And as long as it's on average between there, then we feel fairly comfortable. Not to say it doesn't drop below that. It does on certain jobs, but that's where we aim for.
Right, we'll come to flexibility on margins, I think, in a bit, because that is a really interesting point. But let's sort of get into the nitty-gritty of it, Nick. Do you track margin as an overall job? Like, is it the margin of that project, or do you break it down for each part of the job?
I look at the bottom line of a blended margin, but when I price, I look at the sort of the different categories. So, for example, I find that the margins that I price up the cabinetry and door components will be at a significantly higher margin than, for example, say appliances and taps, or I include installation in my quotes. So the margin that I put on installation is nowhere near what I apply for the cabinetry.
So how about you, Liz? Do you go for an overall project or individual products?
Bit of both. So we have the margin set for each kind of area. Worktops and appliances are particularly low for us. We have a really good fabricator for worktops, so it's more of an admin fee than anything else. And it helps us to stay competitive against many of the local people. We don't charge directly for installation, which is a downfall considering how admin heavy we are. We've moved some areas of that over to start gaining a bit more control and to make a little bit on that. But where we've done that, we've reduced the cost of our furniture so that we're still kind of netting out round about the same overall project margin, but winning perhaps some more of those supply onlys.
Okay, Steph, individual margins on products or overall projects?
So we're interested in the average for the project, really. So it's about the blended margin. We do look at it, obviously, by individual products. But to be honest, most of our products, in terms of the terms we get, the margin we make on them will be very similar across brassware, furniture, sanitary ware, for example. So we know that as long as we're not discounting too much on certain areas, that we should come out at a certain overall average project margin. So we have a sort of live spreadsheet that we're on daily per month, and we've got each of the projects listed on there with its overall project costs, margin, GP, and we track that every week in our weekly meeting. We'll discuss the margins and, what were good jobs, what were bad jobs, and where the margins slipped and that kind of thing. We're really looking at like the average margin for each project. We discuss how we can make improvements.
So across all the product areas that would go into the bathroom, it doesn't sound like there's a variation in margin in the way that there is against appliances versus furniture versus worktops, for example.
I think that's right. There's certain areas that we struggle to get to source products with a decent margin. So, for example, lighting. Often in bathrooms, you want to make a real statement with the lighting. Given we're sort of design focused, there are certain suppliers that we can go to, get good terms on our lights. But if people want something a bit different, we're always going to have to appreciate that we've got the suppliers, but we're going to get a low margin on that particular product. But we'll put it in because it's the right product for the customer. So that's the kind of thing for us that can sometimes bring a project down if customers come in with a very set idea of exactly what product they want, and that's not one that we can get good terms with. But overall, we'll have our sort of go-tos that we know are going to work for that customer, and that will be the bulk of the project, and we know what our margin is on that. So we're just aiming for that overall good average, really.
Right, forgive me for being very naive about this, because I don't run a showroom, but if you want to improve your margins, it seems to me there's only 3 levers you can pull. You sell for more, you buy for less, or you reduce your costs overall. You want to do all 3, obviously, but Nick, which sort of order do you do them in? Where do you go to first when you want to improve your overall margins as opposed to individual projects?
That's the biggest conundrum for all of us, I think, and it's something that I know I battle with almost on a daily basis. I made a really conscious effort over the last 12 months, and I've talked about it previously, about giving myself a good talking to. And I think historically, I've probably applied margins on the lower side because I think that will win me more work and keep us all busy. Over the last 12 months, I've made more of an effort to increase those margins and see what the effect of that is actually on the conversion rate. And the answer has been not a lot. And I think that's a really important lesson for me. I think what it's taught me is that there's jobs that I was never going to win because I'm never going to be the absolute cheapest. So if someone is buying on price, they're not going to buy from me anyway. So whether I put another 500 or £1,000 on the price of the kitchen, I was never going to get it anyway unless I went even lower. And I try to not go there. So what I have found is that I've applied higher margins and I'm still winning the jobs. And so for me, that's been a big lesson. And I think that's a really important one for us because, realistically, if someone is spending, say, £25,000 on a kitchen and you put another £500 or £600 on the price of that kitchen, is that going to deter them from buying from you? Probably not. Is that going to have quite a nice impact on your bottom line in terms of the way that you can afford to run your business and pay all your staff? Yes, it is. So sometimes it's worth exploring that and seeing whether you can increase your margins.
We're always making sure that we're getting the best deal for the commitment that we make to our suppliers. Going back to last week's episode, making sure that we've got that relationship and not going for the whole market, as it were, and all suppliers. So that's always happening. So that's most likely to be the front runner. But for us, because we are very service led, our approach currently is introducing more and more into our own remit and charging directly on top of that work. So we theoretically have smoother jobs if they're supply only, or less responsibility, and earn more money when we've got to be more heavy on the old manpower side.
That's about efficiency, Steph, isn't it? You can improve your margins by just becoming more efficient in your administration. It's like you said earlier about jobs, making jobs as easy and straightforward as possible.
Yeah, exactly. Interesting. One thing we've been really focusing on recently is our costs, but not so much our fixed costs, because there's only so much you can do with those, but more so in terms of, where do we lose margin on jobs? Where do the complications come in? Where do the errors come in? When there's an issue on site and we end up having to cover it because we want to maintain that service. So we've been looking very much at processes we can put into place with our sales process to reduce errors and make sure everyone's on the same page, clients and us, if you like. So we've introduced a new kind of DocuSign process that we get clients to sign off on their projects and all the key details just after the point of sale. And it's really helped us to be able to control those extra spends, if you see what I mean.
Joining us now from presumably a ferry or on top of a mountain somewhere is Trevor Scott. Where are you, Trevor?
Lake Windermere. We're heading back down today anyway, so we thought we'd stop off via the Lake District, which, bearing in mind it was Bank Holiday Monday yesterday, was a huge mistake. Traffic's been a nightmare, but there you go.
Yes, I can only imagine. Well, look, thank you for joining us, and I will now sting you with a question straight away because you missed the first part, so I hope that's okay. We're talking about margins, but when an actual customer sat in front of you and you put a price in front of them that they just can't do, what's the best way to adjust that project without damaging your margin, but also giving the customer what they want?
Well, that's the perennial question. If I had the magic wand and the perfect answer to it, I'd be a wealthier man than I am. The long and the short of it is a process of negotiation. What we tend to have is we have the ideal would like to achieve price for a job, which has got the perfect margin on it. And then we've got a line below which we're not prepared to cross. And somewhere between the two is the designer had choice of making a decision to drop the price a little bit in order to win the deal. And then below that again is a manager's discretion, which sounds like the old direct sales line, but it isn't. It's just a genuine, let's have a tight look at the margins and see whether or not we can drop another few bob or so in order to secure the job. But at that point, it starts to influence the commission that the designer can get as well, because it can't all be on us. So it's a fine balancing act. We try to mitigate it with offers. So if you can give somebody a dishwasher that has a perceived value of £700 or £800, but actually only costs us £300 or £400, then the actual hurt to us as a business is considerably less. But the perceived value of the drop close discount to the consumer is quite high.
Okay, Nick, what about you? What levers do you pull when you want to keep your margin, but the customer doesn't like the price?
It involves more dialogue with the customer, as Trevor's said, and it does vary from customer to customer, but I look at spec and see where they would like to save money by an adjustment in the spec. And for me, I'll be honest, I usually, given the choice, would start with appliances, because I think it's one of those things where the margin isn't as high as the cabinetry. So why would you cut cabinetry in favour of appliances? And I think the other thing is that if you look at appliances, quite often manufacturers are pushing features and functions all the time in appliances. Yeah, it might vary from place to place, but if I look at our typical client, how do they cook in their oven? They turn it on, fan, 180, might be 200, but it's something like that. They might want a self-cleaning oven. And then beyond that, you're selling them functions and features that quite often, when you actually speak to customers in 2 or 3 years' time, they've still not used them. So if you are adding £1,000 to your job by selling a higher spec of oven because it looks fancier, but it isn't actually giving them any real value, then why would you be leaving that in and taking cabinetry out? So for me, I will start with appliances if that's what they are. I've got a different one at the moment where I've got a client and she's a really keen cook. She wants all that functionality. So we've looked at other areas. We've looked at changing from quartz to laminate work surfaces. But as a starting point, that's where I would usually start from.
What's the equivalent of that in bathrooms, Steph?
So we will usually be, again, design-led. We'll usually have open conversation with the client. We'll have set that cleared budget before we start the job. And often, clients want something they can't get for that budget. So what we'll do is we'll discuss what the kind of core visual impact pieces are of the design, they really don't want to compromise on, and we'll try and keep those in the design. And then, so that might be usually a vanity unit or perhaps a particular shower enclosure. And then on the other bits and pieces, sanitary ware, brassware, we'll choose suppliers that we get the highest margin with, which we know will still work just as well within their design. So it's about rebalancing the spend for us. So yeah, maintaining sort of the integrity of the design, but trying to remain commercial. It's about picking which pieces we want to keep in, which might be lower margin, and then everything else we'll go with a supplier we know we get a good margin on.
Do you have cut-off marks like Trevor does, Liz? Do you have lines that you don't cross?
We're a bit more set up like Nick is. So we discuss what it is the client wants. We also ask up front about the budget, and we ask how did they get to that budget? Does it include everything? Is it part of it? Is it a figure they've plucked out of the air? Because that's what they've heard is the right figure to spend. So we've got a good understanding of that. Inevitably, we're normally over budget. So we have a list of things that we could downgrade to, normally not the appliances. So we start potentially with drawer boxes. So we might go to an older version drawer box, and if it's heavy on those, then that can save quite a lot of money. One of the reasons we don't downgrade the appliances is because we do a lot of cooking demonstrations, and then people bring along a friend, so we get a new lead off the back of that. So trying to keep that spec up and that desire is really important to us. So yeah, we will look at furniture or a non-branded quartz or something like that that's still going to give the same performance and function before we start taking things out, really.
So Trevor, this is the nitty-gritty of stuff. Where do margins most commonly slip, do you think, without retailers really monitoring it or realising it? What are the biggest mistakes they make?
It's quite a difficult one. I think realistically, and over the last few years, this has definitely been the case, is where price increases from suppliers come into play during the cycle of the quotation process. But people are taking a lot longer to make decisions, and we've had the conversation about getting clients across the line before now. You're quoting at one price level with a margin on it. By the time you've taken the order, there's been a price increase gone in, but you've honoured the price that you've quoted at. And by the time you actually get the order into the supplier and have an invoice from it, sometimes it's gone up again. And that can impact margin if you're not careful. So making sure that our systems are as up to date as is humanly possible, and caveating with our designs and our quotes that price increases are a possibility, but the sooner you get the order in, then the sooner we can bake in that price, and we'll get orders off to suppliers as quickly as we can do. This has improved in the last 18 months, 2 years or so, but certainly there was that rush of price increases post-COVID, and we just couldn't keep up. And that was probably our worst year ever for margin management. And, it really showed in the books at the end of the year. We were selling at the right price. It's just that we weren't buying at the right price anymore. And it was almost force majeure. It was circumstances beyond our control that made it happen. I
had a similar year, actually more on the plumbing side of the business than the kitchens, but definitely on the plumbing side where I'll hold my hands up with. I didn't keep on top of the price rises as much as I should have done, and it royally bit me on the backside at the end of the financial year. cash flow was there, but the margins weren't. And I think that's one of the reasons I've spent the last couple of years recovering from that and making sure that I'm keeping a lot beadier eye on what we're buying for and what margins we're applying, and making sure that we pay attention when we get those emails through about price rises, and they're not just kind of skimmed over and filed in a subfolder somewhere.
Especially at the moment, because of what's happening around the world, you are going to see those prices going up again. Steph, are you sort of ultra conscious of this as well?
Yeah, we are seeing that. We track supplier price increases quite closely. We'll always have it in our calendar when there's a price increase coming, and it's actually a helpful way to close projects because we'll communicate that to the client. But yeah, we're definitely seeing increases, and so we're trying to be ultra on it with not over discounting, that kind of thing. For us, I think we're very aware of trying to sell the service, because at the end of the day, we're not actually just selling the products, we're selling a service. So communicating that and putting value on that allows you to keep your prices up a bit, and rightly so, because it is a service that you're not going to get through shopping online.
Could I just touch briefly, Liz, on installation and where that fits into an overall margin? Because you were saying you don't really put a margin on that, but that's obviously half the job. So how does that work?
It's about winning jobs over competitors, or historically, that's what it's always been. We find that, especially having newer designers who aren't as project-led as we are, that we have lost money on underpricing, under kind of understanding of how much work moving some plumbing is, or how much plastering really needs to be undertaken. So that is why we're taking that move to start making some money on there and protect that a bit. It can just be hard to kind of understand and allow yourself to put that value on your own time. And it comes back to other things like putting value onto design fees. So I think it's kind of a bit circular there. So it's just about respecting your time and realizing that it costs, and our employee costs are massive. It's one of the biggest things that we have after materials. So we should be making money on that. We spend a lot of time making sure people's projects go well and they've got the best trades in the area, and we stay on top of things and sort them out without argument generally. And that's something to bear in mind.
You have an in-house installation team, Trevor. How does margin work on the installation costs?
Well, no, actually we don't. We operate as a supply-only business for our retail market, and we subcontract the installation to third-party installers. They pay the installers directly at the end of the project and upon satisfactory completion and sign-off. So it's an old bag, but it kind of focuses everybody's mind on doing a good job. The installer does a doubly good job because he wants to make sure he gets paid at the end of it. And we're happy, and the client is happy, because the price is that bit lower than it might be if there was VAT and a margin on the labour. So it's a kind of a win-win for the consumer, and it's how we've always done it. That said, in recent years, we've introduced a management fee, a project management fee, that is included in every quote. It's tiered depending on the scale of the job as to what value number we put in. And that's a tablets to stone figure, because we're doing a lot of work. As Liz quite rightly says, we're doing an awful lot of work to support and manage the installation, and we should and do earn some money out of it. But it's part of our direct cost, and therefore part of our selling price for the furniture and the appliances, but it's not loaded onto the installation. Now, I'm in a dilemma at the moment. It's something we're analysing and looking at a lot closer this year. Is the time right to bring installation in-house? Because I look at the example of Alexander's Kitchen down in Worthing. They've got a very successful, very profitable installation company. But they do a lot of bathrooms. Now, bathrooms, as Steph will confirm, you're looking at 50% labour, 50% goods, more or less. Now, with kitchens, it's definitely not that kind of scale. It's more an 80-20 or 75-25 split in favour of the product. So we're not selling enough labour to justify bringing it in-house, and it's just getting that balance right and actually sort of making enough money. Because obviously, once we start employing the fitters, then there's all sorts of additional costs. Although you could still subcontract and you just charge them out directly and they invoice you net monthly. Now, we do this with our developer clients. All developers want the VAT-free project. It can only be zero rated if it's supplied and installed. So the irony is that for that quite significant part of our business that is contract, we are marginalising and we are selling labour as part of the open project. So it's like, well, if we're doing it for contracts, how much more of a reach is it for us to take it into retail as well? And that's my dilemma at the moment.
So you're supply only, Steph, aren't you?
We are supply only. We offer the full service by working with recommended installers. So it sounds like very similar to Trevor. So we don't actually take the money for the install ourselves. That's given directly to our recommended installation teams, who we have a really close relationship with. So, we've worked with them for a long time, and we know we can just check in whenever. So it works, but it's a continual conversation for us about, can we get installation in-house? Like you say, the price of the install of the bathroom is usually slightly more than the cost of the products. And that's what we're finding at the moment on our projects. And so it's frustrating for us because we will often have to reduce our margin in order to win the job because the installer's price is fixed. So we risk losing a job or we reduce our margin. So that's the sort of situation we're in. It does work for us with the trusted installation teams. It's less stress. We do still incur installation costs. A product issue on site that happens 6 months down the line. Does the installer pay for it? Do we pay for it? Inevitably, it ends up that we pay for the installers to go back. So there's pros and cons, I think. But for us, we're very much, given how much of the total project budget goes into the install, we're wondering if we can find a way to bring that in-house and sort of set the prices ourselves. I think the people that have done that and have made it work are doing really well from it, but I think it's difficult to do.
I'm just curious because we're all talking about how we deal with installation and it all is fairly similar, I think. When you put your quotes together, this is Trevor and Steph, when you give your clients your price, does that include that quotation for that installation, or do you give them the kitchen price or a bathroom price and then you get the quote for the installation, or do you give them the bottom line figure for the entire project?
So we'll go out to site, we'll understand what the project spec is, and then we will send out an estimate for the products and an estimate for the installation through our installers. So they've got two separate prices. So we will have had a conversation with the installer before we send those estimates out to say, look, this is the project, this is what building works involved, etc. So they can give quite a accurate estimate. And so we'll send those out separately and we'll say, look, this is our product cost with the design service, and this is what the install estimate will be if you come with our team, but you're welcome to go out and get your own installation costs if you like, and that could well bring your project cost down. So yeah, we do it separately.
We include installation within the quote, but it is as a separate line or paragraph, and it's defined between the dry fit of the kitchen as we see it to a room that is ready to receive us, i.e. the old kitchen has been stripped out and the electrics have been done to first fit level, plastering, etc., etc. Then we can come in and dry fit the kitchen and then plumb it up and make final connections. So that's a fixed price because we can work that out. We've got enough years of experience. We've then got the estimated price for all the additional work that might be required on that particular project, i.e. the steel put in, and a doorway moved, a serving hatch blocked up, a significant amount of plastering, a significant amount of electrical work. And we caveat that as being estimated, which will then be confirmed post the point of sale by an on-site installer visit. And we're usually pretty close. We get it more right than wrong. But that's because, again, years and years and years of experience. But we discuss it with the installers. We know that certain teams of installers have got certain skill sets and can manage and handle the levels of complexity with an install better than others can. And we'll bring them into the showroom on a Friday afternoon and just say, can you have a look at this one? And what do you reckon? If we gave you this job tomorrow, what are you going to charge us for doing all this ancillary work? And they'll come up with a figure. And 9 out of 10 times, it's about right. So everybody's happy.
Let's round this up, Liz, by revisiting turnover is vanity, profit is sanity. The balance between getting the margin you want, but also the cash flow of keeping jobs moving through the system. So what is the case for taking a lower margin job?
As I said before, we've had a quiet couple of months and we've taken a couple of lower margin jobs, more for staff morale than anything else. Also, when we came out of that rush of the COVID explosion of everyone doing their homes up, we had more fitters than we had jobs at that point. So we lost the loyalty of some of those fitters. So keeping them busy has to be a balance as well, because you want them to be available to do your remedial when you kind of ask them to. You want to be able to rely on them, to be able to just book them in and know that they're okay to do the work and not have to negotiate between private jobs as well. So making sure you've got that balance of projects and the right size projects and not all builds, because then you get a cash flow issue there. A couple of supply only, a couple of dry fits, a few builds, and just making sure that throughout the year you're managing that and you're looking at your pipeline.
Yeah, I do agree with that. Particularly in quiet periods, we'll take on lower margin jobs just for the sake of cash flow, really. But also, yeah, we do want to have that continual supply that we give to our installation teams as well. When we're busy, we're a lot more discerning, I suppose, regarding the inquiries we get in terms of which ones we might prioritise. Sometimes we'll take a lower margin job if it's a strategic client, maybe an interior designer or an architect that we want to start working with. We might take the job on just to sort of nurture that relationship for future work. But yeah, we're always open to lower margin jobs. It's just a case of how you manage your team's time, I suppose. So the lower margin jobs, in our experience, tend to be the more stressful because they come with just the same amount of admin. It's exactly the same process, just the same risk of issues down the line. And so we will always try to prioritise the higher margin jobs.
Possibly the other thing I would add is that we've talked about margin, but obviously that's related to the profit in the job. And, on a kitchen, it can take almost as long to do a £20,000 job as it takes to do a £35,000 job. And so arguably sometimes you can afford to take a slightly lower margin on a higher priced job because overall for that, say, 2-week period of fitting, there's still more money dropping onto your bottom line out of that higher price job than the lower price job. So, I do think about that as well when I'm looking at the margins and whether I'm prepared to go a little bit lower.
It all becomes a matter of statistics at the end of the day. If you sold a dozen jobs in a month, can you afford that 2 of them are slightly under margin? Well, yes, you probably can. If you only sell 4, 1 a week in a smaller studio, if you put an under margin job on one of those 4, then that's 25% of the turnover that's being impacted by a lower margin. If you keep on doing that all through the year, it won't be long before you don't make any money at all. So it's sometimes it is a matter of scale.
Well, look, I think this is a big topic here, and we've already ironically added on a good 20% on the end of it, talking about it. But thank you so much for your time this week. Thank you for tuning in, Trevor, from Windermere. Have a good journey home.
Thank you.
And thank you to Mrs. Scott. Thank you for your patience. Right, okay, everybody, I'll see you next week.
Thanks. Take care.
Bye.